Happy Saturday. This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports. I'm going to drop this crank off for this 496 FE build on Monday so we can have the mains touch ground. I need an extra thou clearance. But got the cam in it, and I've got lifters, and I've got a cylinder head bolted on with a head gasket. So we're going to go ahead and make sure our geometry is correct, and if our geometry is correct, then I'm gonna go ahead and be preemptive. And preemptive, a word? I guess it's a word. It may not be the meaning that I want it to be, but I don't know what I want, but I can go ahead and order push rods is what I'm getting at. So we got the head gasket on, the lifters, rocker arms. This is the T&D paired rocker system. It uses this big subplate, and you can't really see it, I don't think, but well, it's held on. I've got a bolt on it right now. We're going to switch to studs, and that's kind of a little issue in and of itself, because when you switch to a stud, most ARP nuts will not fit down in here, so the bar has to be spot faced. But we're going to switch to studs. We got it held on temporarily with the bolts and our studs on the bottom row, but that's the subplate that mounts everything down. And then you have this bar which bolts to it with these bolt holes, and then your paired rockers that bolt with 3 bolts. So I've got checking springs on because I just have the cam in. There'd be no way I could turn that cam over with, you know, almost 700 pounds of spring load. So got checking springs in. I'm going to mock up my push rod length checker, and we're going to roll this over. I can roll the cam over by hand, and we can see what our pattern looks like. All right. Since I last did a segment, it's probably been about an hour, because believe it or not, I could not get these valves to show an imprint at all. I was using checking springs, I was using marker, I was using machinist blue. I could not get it to go. So finally I put the inner springs on so that it would be fighting against me harder. But this is the pattern that I'm getting, so I'm pretty pleased with that. A very narrow pattern in the middle of the stem. So now that that's done, I spent an hour doing that. I can measure my push rod length. So finally, what I think I'm gonna do is throw another head gasket and the other head on, and the intake, so I can get an idea of how much push rod clearance I have. I'd like to run a 7/16 push rod on this if I can. So I think I'm gonna bolt that other head and gasket on and set the intake down and see what I see. So I've got our intake on, and I checked the push rod length, and I've got an actual push rod about the length of what I need. And that's a 3/8 diameter. What you don't see is it looks like you got a ton of room, but when you go at full lift, and I can look through this gap in the china wall with a flashlight, and what happens is the push rod wants to hug the top side of the push rod hole at full lift. It's really centered, which is good. So I think what I will do is, depending on what I get over here, I'll order 7/16 push rods, and we'll take a mill and push this hole that way. I don't want to go this way or this way, because the way these intakes are laid out, this one's been ported too. I don't want to get into breaking through a wall and having to sleeve it and all that stuff. So we're good side to side. We just need a little bit more room up and down, and I think we can get that. So that's the exhaust side. Let me check the intake side. All right, on the intake side, now these rockers were ordered with offset, and it's kind of offset the wrong direction. And I could take the time and swap because an FE head is symmetrical about this part. So I could take these rockers off the little axles and swap them out, and it would center this. But when I look back through this way, through the channel wall gap, as I roll the engine over, just the way that it is, gets dangerously close to the top of the push rod hole here. Now, I could do this the same way as this one and elongate it, but if you can see the way that the runner goes, and then let me see if I can get my light so you can see what I'm seeing. You can actually see the wall of the runner down through there. So if we start cutting this hole this way, we could potentially get into that intake runner. So, you know, this is a game of risk versus reward, and a 3/8 135 wall push rod is really stout. So I think I'm gonna just play on the side of safety and order 3/8 135 wall for both. Like I said, it gets pretty close to the intake manifold. When I roll it over, it doesn't move the intake manifold, and I'll be able to see once I pull this push rod out if it's left any marks on it. But I don't care if the push rod's kind of lean against the intake manifold. You just don't want it in a bind. And in a 100% optimal situation, you'll have at least 10 thousandths clearance is what the push rod manufacturers recommend. But just on, I mean, this isn't going to be a real high RPM engine, nor does it have extremely high valve spring pressures. So I want to go back and measure. I'll pull the intake back off and measure correctly my push rod length checker, and I'll order some 3/8 135 push rods. All right, so a few things to do before you get your final push rod length. T&D wants you to, there's a fly in here, set the adjuster position. So you back the nut off, you back the adjuster all the way out, you go one full turn down and lock it down, and that's where an optimal setting is for your adjuster. And there's oiling provisions that way, and obviously you can move it a little bit either way, but they like for you to try to nail it right there. So this cam has 20 thousandths hot lash, which means it's got 14 thousandths cold lash. So I've got my feeler gauge in there, and I've got my push rod length checker adjusted. We're checking the intake, so we've got the exhaust lifter starting to open, and what I can do now is pull this pair of rockers off, measure our length, and record that for the intake side. So what I've come up with is 9,300 on the intake side, 9,275 on the exhaust side. And when you're doing individual push rods like this, it's not uncommon to see a little bit difference in the push rod length, just because each and every valve is not going to sit perfectly the same between the intake and exhaust, and there may even be a little bit different lengths on your valves, or the valve job is a little bit different on one side than the other, or whatever. So it's kind of good to measure all your valves. But we're set, and that's what I'm going to order. I'm going to send in my order now to Trend and get the push rods coming, so I can have all the parts here for when the crank comes back. Thank you all again for watching, and I hope this helped a little bit on doing your geometry setup and push rod length and checking for clearance and all that stuff. So hope you're having a good day, and if you haven't subscribed yet, take time to do that. Y'all have a good weekend.